Can you talk a little bit about any just really surprising things that you learned? I mean, I'm sure you have some amazing stories.
Let's see, how much time do you have?
Maybe just a couple of examples of things that have come up during regression that really surprised you.
Boy, that's a hard one because, well, okay, you know, because the
reason I know it's very broad.
Well, no, the reason I'm hesitating is that if I was new to this work, but I do have an answer. It's just that after a number of years, sometimes clients will come in and they'll say, "Now I'm going to tell you something, but I bet you're going to be shocked." And I want to say, I probably am not going to be shocked. Things that surprise me. We don't have all our lives on this planet. We have lives other than on this planet.
Okay, that's big.
That is big, and maybe is surprising, but I have honestly no doubt because because my rule is don't put content in the left brain of the client before we start. I don't put that content out there, and even for a client who's never read anything about other planets or, you know, they're not really even into that.
Right.
We discover they've had a life somewhere else. So I think in the beginning that kind of shocked me. We often gain a lot of soul development elsewhere.
Okay.
And that's because truly Earth is the most dense laboratory. We're the more complex place. Elsewhere often is easier relationships, easier access to our intuition. This is where, you know, this is the laboratory, but this is the laboratory of great progress. Almost always other places, if you will, are easier. So, yeah.
So this is like I don't know, like the extra challenging assignment that you might get, or if you're just really trying to get to that next level, this is where you may be.
Yes, exactly. And I would say, then the question might come up, so it's floating around in my brain. You're not asking it, but if, you know, someone could say, well, so do most of us have lives elsewhere? And I would say the answer to that is likely yes.
Okay.
And, you know, that probably feels weird to people.
I would say for most people that's probably a strange idea, but yeah, it makes sense.
Well, you know, truthfully, and maybe the information is new to people, but I often, when the client comes in, I start developing these silent hunches in my head before the regression happens. I've discovered I can almost always tell when a client comes in who has had a lot of lives on Earth versus not a lot of lives on Earth. So if you think about people that you know, there are people that look like they just look more, it's always hard to put words to this, kind of a general average looking person. Rounded features, softer, easy way to put it into words, softer features to the face, for instance. If you come upon someone who has a more unique, if you will, look, that can well be someone who has had lots of lives elsewhere, because where we've been, who we've been, what happened is also carried in a way in something I like to call soul DNA, and it shows up from lifetime to lifetime. It shows up in our body and in our facial structure.
So what we look like is not just having to do with, you know, our physical genes, but actually does have something to do with our soul as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And some people, but not everyone, can have a similar look, life to life. Is that correct?
It is very common. I'll use, some people watching this may end up knowing the person to whom I've been married for a long time. So, and I know I have permission to share this. So my husband is a tall, broad-shouldered man. At his tallest, he was 6'5". He's probably shrunk a little bit at this point. He has been a warrior, a soldier type, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. He's still carrying a warrior's body.
Okay.
I have not, people can obviously see what I look like, I have not been a warrior. You have probably not been a warrior lifetime to lifetime. So yes, we carry a similar physicality. And
so when you see someone maybe in their family, they don't look maybe much like their family, it could have something to do with that potentially. Not
very possibly. Very possibly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other things that just really surprised you as you got into regression work that have come up?
Boy, I'm sure there are. Let's see. Let me see what pops in my head. While I'm thinking, I'll just comment that I love regression work because no two sessions are the same.
Mm.
You know, I did love being a general psychologist, but
Right.
General psychology can be more similar, if you will. There are no two sessions alike. There are certainly, yeah, so here's what pops in my head
Okay.
to that question. I have to stop and think a minute. Not often does a client come in who had a life that is historically documentable.
Oh,
So
right.
it's very uncommon.
Okay.
So I don't want the listeners to think that is common because it's
Okay.
not. But, and, there are times when I regress someone, and yeah, I'll stretch this a little bit wider as I'm sharing it. And the client starts telling great details about a figure in history.
Mm.
It may not be a hugely prominent figure. So occasionally, and underlined occasionally, that client was that person. Or that client knew the historical figure and spent a lot of time around that figure.
Okay.
And that's where the information comes from. So it doesn't necessarily automatically, it doesn't automatically mean the client was that person. I always joke because I've probably regressed about maybe 5 or 6 Mary Magdalenes. All those people were not Mary Magdalene. In fact, maybe none of them were Mary Magdalene.
Right.
But that means that the client, and we're talking, this is the beauty of regression that is hard just to explain in words, the details that someone comes up with in terms of body and clothing and circumstances is far too detailed to be just plucked out of the client's left brain.
Right.
So again, occasionally the client might be that documentable person or spent a lot of time in close connection with that person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I talked about incarnation that comes up to, for me is this question of animals and other life forms. So what is your understanding of that? I mean, one of the ideas is that okay if you're, do something bad, maybe you come back as a cockroach or something. So I'm not saying that I think that happens.
Going
I've heard
downwards.
that. Yeah, so, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that, again, are based on regression. So
Okay.
they're not based on something I even read in a book or plucked out of the air. I find that except for some of the highly developed animals such as dolphins and that whole culture of animals, I don't, at least in my work, I don't find that we've been developing from animal to human.
Okay.
Now, that's not to say that's not true. It may just be I haven't uncovered that. But in the regressions I've done, I've not found that. And quite honestly, I would almost want to put a stake in the ground and say we are not punished by being forced, after, I don't live a very adequate incarnation. We're not then made to be some low-level life form.
Right.
I really don't think that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always seemed unlikely when I thought about it. So that's kind of nice to hear.
And maybe just one more quick comment about that is maybe there is no such thing as a low-level life form. In other words, all life is all life. And there is energy in rocks, there is energy in, as I'm sure probably a lot of people know, trees and all life forms. So that it's just different types of life form. Yeah.
So, in going back a little bit to the idea of the soul family, I was rather surprised to learn that when you have incarnations with someone and you've shared a lot of lives, let's say they're your husband in this life, they may have been your child
Right.
in another life.
Right.
So, can you talk a little bit about what are the different iterations and why that is? Why would we do that?
Well, first of all, we do it, just as you're saying, Laura, because we come from the same soul group, often,
Right.
not always, but often. Think about what we work out. So we just take the simple example of, I have children. So in this lifetime, I'm the mother, and let's just say my son is my son. If we flip it over, which I've actually uncovered at least one life, where my current life adult son was my parent. Think of what we're learning so that it isn't I always get to be the mother and parent you. you have parented me, and that's a balancing. It's a balancing of relationships. So, for example, I know people where, see if I can make this clear, the adult person who has an adult child, the adult child is married and has a child. The adult person that's married and has a child, regression has shown us that there's wife, husband, and oldest child. The husband was the child in a past life, and the oldest child in current life was the husband when the husband was the child.
Right.
And if you talk to people about that, you'll find, when I've interviewed people like that, they'll say, yeah, it's really weird. My child, even from a young age, acts kind of parental. So that it's just, there are signs that show up of there was parent-child flip-flop or sibling parent flip-flop or whatever.
Right. So when you have a dynamic, maybe that's not sort of the traditional parent-child relationship, it may be an indication that you've had these past lives with the different relationships and different roles.
I see it in my own life. Sometimes I want to tease my children. One in particular, I want to say, now, are you the parent or am I the parent? It's like, no, I know you've been my parent, so I better stop looking at it that way. And that truly does happen.
I love that.
Yeah. And it's, again, think of what we learn by having played different roles. So we don't just get to, it's not cut and dried. I think nothing in life is cut and dried. At least that's my perspective of life.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this has been really wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up for today?
I think I would just say that coming to understand who we are as a soul is so valuable that instead of seeing ourselves, use myself as an example, instead of seeing myself as, Linda Backman, who's done this kind of work and is married and has children and grandchildren, oh my goodness, when I've learned about my past lives, where I've been, who I've been, it explains me to me in a way I would never have understood myself.
Right.
So I'll just close with that kind of simple statement.
Great, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, and if people at home in the audience want to try and find out more information or get in contact with you, how can they do that?
They can find me, I'll give a couple of ways. One is website, www.raven, like the bird, this is all run together, Raven, heart, like the heart in our chest, center, ravenheartcenter.com, or 303-818-0575.
Great. And I just want to also mention for people that don't know that Dr. Backman can do long distance readings, so you don't necessarily have to be here in Colorado to have a session.
Correct.
Well, thanks everyone for watching. I wanted to give a thank you to Journeys for Conscious Living for hosting here in Arvada, Colorado. They've been great. And wanted to let the audience know that if you want more information on Healing Powers, you can go on our website, which is www.healingpowers.net. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
All right, we have some questions from the studio audience.
So say you have a loved one that passes and you're still in contact with that loved one through premonitions or dreams or messages of some sort. When it comes time for them to reincarnate, are you still going to be in contact with them in that way of them being on the other side?
Yes, that's a great question. People ask that a lot, and I get that question often from widows and widowers who maybe have a spouse die in their 40s or 50s, but the client thinks they're going to live to be 70s or 80s or whatever. So the bottom line is yes, you always have the ability to have contact even when that soul potentially reincarnates, because that soul has a higher self. So even if that soul, so the soul finishes current, so let's just say it's, it's someone I know, they die, their soul energy that was in their body returns and returns to their higher self in spirit. 10 years later, theoretically, they incarnate. When they incarnate, they still have a higher self. So I could still have contact because I have contact with their higher self.
So I have a couple of, like a part A and part B question about parallel lives.
Okay.
And the first part is, do parallel life incarnations, do they tend to meet or interact while they're incarnate? And that's part A. And then are there ever more than two at a time is part B. And then C is, I guess, can the parallel lives be lived on different planets at the same time?
Okay.
I assume they would be, but...
Okay, so first one is, do they ever meet? Do the parallel
Do they tend
lives-
to interact and meet? When
The
they're-
answer to that is they generally do not meet. I actually do know of a couple of examples of when, I tend to call them splits, if you will, when the splits, the two people who are the same soul, and I'll just comment, we're not talking about what people call twin souls, so that's a whole different thing. But that's rare. It's rare for the two parallel lives or splits to meet. That's the first one. Second one, I think I'm remembering your third, but let me add. Do they incarnate? Is it possible to have a split or a parallel life, one here on Earth and another elsewhere? Answer's yes. And then remind me the middle.
Are there ever more than two?
Yes,
at once?
is the answer. It's not common, but yes. And if there are more than two, it's highly likely that that soul is extremely developed. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, great questions.
Okay, Linda, my question is, I've had a lot of reoccurring dreams throughout my life, and Vicki has done a regression on me, and one of them actually, I didn't know it at the time, but came to be one of the dreams. Would you say those might be glimpses of your past life and maybe hints of something you're supposed to work out or get over? Or?
Yes. The bottom line, simple answer is absolutely. Spirit at times will show us the details of a past life in a dream by way of either we need to be informed by what we're learning in the dream, and or we at times we have past lives where there are experiences in the past life that we've not cleaned up, if you will, that we've not released and let go of. We're still carrying some trauma and it's affecting us now. So sometimes our guides will sort of download into the dream the content of the past life so as to give us fodder, so to speak, to work on, to progress and let go of something that happened in that life.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of clarify, it is when you have a relationship with someone in your current life and the behavior of one of the parties seems less evolved, we'll say, is that necessarily an indication of the soul's evolutionary progress, or do souls just come in and due to their experiences in that life and their agreements before incarnation, they just take on this role that seems rather, unevolved?
Yeah, that's an excellent question too. I would lean, in giving you an answer, I would lean toward the latter versus the former. It's so easy, and I find this good example is, I often have a client come in who's married. It's often the wife, and she says, well, I'm into spiritual things, and she has learned through various means, or maybe through regression, that she's a fairly experienced soul. And she says, my husband's just not, And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, So we do a between lives regression. And what we at times learn is that her husband has agreed to play a role, to be in support of her, but not to be deeply and overtly spiritual. And he's just as experienced a soul as she. So I lean toward the second possibility versus the first, even though the first is certainly an option. Yeah. Sometimes we're really surprised. It's like, oh no, this person's quite evolved. It's like, I always use the example of, for anybody who's been around Union Square in San Francisco. Union Square around San Francisco is just full of street people, homeless people, those types of people. And I've walked around Union Square many times, and it's like, as I walk by these people, I ask myself, I look at some of these people and I say to myself, I bet you're as highly developed a soul as I've ever come across, and you're learning something and you're affecting people by being willing to live in that mode, or that you're the person who's been labeled as schizophrenic, but you're an extremely developed soul that agreed to take on that incarnation. So we have to be so careful. You know, we all live with human minds that become judgmental. So important to try not to do that, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody else, so yeah.
You spoke about people, born with homosexual inclinations. That can also be an indication of a certain level of attainment, which, the sort of unification and androgyny. So what would you say then about people inclined toward the monastic life?
Wow, good questions. Great questions. Well, I could say a lot of things, so let me see if I can sort of slowly tick off different things that pop in my mind. First of all, when you're asking that question about the monastic life, are you talking about currently, or when we uncover a past life that was monastic?
I think I'm talking about someone inclined to the monastic life currently who has a sense that they may have lived monastically, just it has this really strong affinity and tendency that way.
Okay. Well, I think if we've lived in a monastic life in the past, we're quite possibly going to desire that, because for any of us who think we've had a monastic life, and I have, there's in some ways just a great beauty to that ability to just go deep, or can be connected to the divine all the time, or be in a community of other monastic people. I do believe that we're in a time period now on our planet with the need for change that needs to happen on our planet. That as much as some of us would wish to be able to live, maybe not fully monastic, but in a more cloistered, putting the word cloistered in quotes, I don't think we get that opportunity. I think, there are times when I feel that way. I often, at times I say to my husband, let's just go live in a cabin in the woods. But I know that that's not what we need to accomplish now. That isn't going to work. On the other hand, I'm thinking about a very good friend of ours that we were just with at a conference, and this man is a very highly developed soul, is very contemplative. He maintains 2 residences. He maintains a residence in a busy metropolitan area, and he recently just moved up into the area around Yosemite. And he says, it's just great, so that I do both. And so he doesn't live fully in a monastic style all the time, but so yes, I think any time we yearn for a monastic life, we've experienced it, and we probably loved it. So.
I just have a question over what you mentioned in that answer, and you said at this time on this planet of great change that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Could you speak more about that?
Yeah. Let's see, do we have, like 3 hours? Well, I think probably all of us are aware. You wouldn't be sitting in the audience if you didn't have an interest in spirituality, so I suspect that everyone sitting here is aware that changes need to happen on our planet. Our planet is struggling to have balance. We don't have balance, to just put it in simple terms. We don't have balance in terms of the rich and poor nations of the world. We don't have balance within cultures. What's going on, what's called the Arab Spring that's happening right now. Those third world countries, those people have discovered through modern things like Facebook that other people on the planet have rights. What a concept! So our world has become so polarized and so judgmental and materialistic, and focused on the almighty dollar, or focused on I hold the power and you are powerless, that we need change. And that's what we're seeing on our planet. We see what's going on environmentally. We need change. I don't believe that we honor this planet that we live on. We just take advantage of her and just, usurp her resources. And so much change needs to happen. I think we see signs of change occurring. It needs to continue. So that's a short.
Right, I think it's a huge subject. And I guess my curiosity is around all the talk about 2012 and with your contact with channels and people with in-between lives that might have other information. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yes, I think 2012 is all tied in with what you asked just prior to that. And I'm not a believer, I'm not a catastrophic thinker. So I don't think on December, on 12/21/2012, it's not like the earth is going to go away. It's not that, ding, 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 a bell rings and everything, kind of is gone. 2012 is a process. And we're building to 2012. We're working on change in many ways already, and change will continue to occur. But I think 2012 in a way is kind of like climbing maybe the first summit. It's like if we go to the Rocky Mountains, we know there are lower summits and higher summits. So we're climbing to one summit, but we will not have summited, period. We're going to have other summits to keep climbing. But I think the Mayans and other cultures and the prophecies, they're a reason for these prophecies. So I think there is reality in 2012, but it's not just we'll reach this pinnacle and everything will just suddenly be picture perfect. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.